She was just an orphan, humiliated and cast aside. He was a cold, rich lawyer, tasked with protecting a fortune while hunting for a long-lost heiress. But what if the very person he was trying to destroy was the one he'd been searching for all along? The truth was hiding in plain sight, marked on her skin by a unique birthmark, a key to an unimaginable destiny. Have you ever felt invisible? Ever felt like the world judged you before you even had a chance? The journey of Judith Daniels begins at the lowest point imaginable, a painful reminder that sometimes, kindness is treated like a weakness. This isn't just a love story, it's a tale about finding your secret identity in a world that tries to erase you. I promise you this will be an emotional roller coaster. We're diving deep into a world of secrets, betrayal, and a revenge no one saw coming. Get ready for a plot twist that will shatter your beliefs about justice and fate, proving that true love can be the most powerful weapon of all. This is a truly heart-touching story. The stakes couldn't be higher. On one side, a powerful dynasty willing to do anything to protect its legacy. On the other, a poor girl with nothing to lose and a heart that refuses to harden. Every confrontation, every moment of being humiliated, is a step toward a shocking and life-changing revelation that will alter everything forever. This is the ultimate poor girl rich man drama. This story will touch your soul. If you're ready for a journey filled with romance and redemption, comment Destiny below. Like this video if you believe the truth always finds a way. Share this with someone who loves a story of overcoming the odds, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single second of this incredible saga. Well, let's get one thing straight: Herbert Hopkins wasn't just a lawyer, he was a fortress. A cold-hearted guardian of his family's immense fortune, a man whose heart seemed to beat in time with the stock market ticker. His entire life was a high-stakes game of protection and preservation, and he played it with a chilling precision. So, when a quiet orphan named Judith Daniels appeared on the estate's periphery, he saw her not as a person, but as a variably an unknown element that needed to be controlled or, preferably, removed entirely. It was just business, after all. He sized her up with a glance that could freeze fire, dismissing her worn-out clothes and gentle demeanor as signs of weakness. In his world, a world of cutthroat deals and legacy battles, there was no room for sentiment. This was the Hopkins dynasty, a name synonymous with power, and Herbert was its reluctant, yet fiercely loyal, sentinel. The idea that this unassuming girl could be anything more than a nuisance was, frankly, laughable to him. He was on a mission, a deeply personal quest to find the long-lost heiress. This girl, Judith, was a distraction. Had spent years, you see, chasing ghosts and following whispers, all in pursuit of the one person who could secure the family's future. The true heir was out there somewhere, and his duty was to find her. Every moment spent dealing with this orphan felt like a moment stolen from that sacred mission. Little did he know, the very thing he sought was standing right before him, a secret identity hidden not by design, but by fate's cruel sense of humor. What a shocking piece of drama was about to unfold. He noticed it but didn't see it. A small, uniquely shaped mark on her wrist as she reached for a fallen file. To him, it was just a blemish, a random imperfection on an already imperfect person. But this birthmark was a living map, a key to a history he was desperately trying to unlock. It was the one symbol he'd been trained to look for since he was a boy, the sigil of the true Hopkins bloodline. It was a detail so monumental, yet so casually overlooked in his haste to dismiss her. Oh, the irony. It's like searching the entire world for a treasure you've left on your own doorstep. Herbert Hopkins, the man who prided himself on meticulous observation and ironclad logic, was blinded by his own prejudice. He was so focused on the grand, dramatic search for a fairy tale heiress that he couldn't recognize the quiet truth when it was serving him tea. This oversight wasn't just a mistake, it was a prelude to a life-changing storm. The stage was set for a classic poor girl rich man encounter, but with a twist he could never anticipate. He was armed with legal documents and a heart of stone, ready to excise her from his family's life with surgical coldness. His mission was clear: protect the Hopkins name at all costs. He saw himself as a hero on a noble quest, completely unaware that he was about to become the villain in his own love story, a story whose first chapter he was writing in pure ignorance. And so, his efforts to push her away would, paradoxically, only pull him deeper into the mystery he was trying to solve. Every legal maneuver, every cold dismissal, was just another step toward a revelation that would shatter his perfectly constructed world. The quiet orphan and the rich lawyer were now on a collision course, and neither of them knew that their shared destiny was about to ignite. It was a collision that would be nothing short of emotional. Life for Judith Daniels at the city orphanage was, well, it was a study in shared scarcity. It was a world painted in shades of gray, where a little kindness was worth more than gold. Yet, it wasn't a place of misery. There was a quiet strength there, a community forged in the fires of shared hardship. Judith, more than anyone, embodied this spirit. She moved through the crowded halls like a gentle whisper, her compassion a silent force that made the difficult days just a little more bearable for everyone. She was the heart of that place. Meanwhile, across the city, the Hopkins dynasty existed in a gilded cage of immense, lonely wealth. Their mansion was less a home and more a museum, filled with priceless artifacts and echoing with the silence of unspoken resentments. This was the world Herbert was tasked to protect. It was a legacy of power, a dynasty built on shrewd decisions and cold ambition. For him, protecting this fortune wasn't just a job, it was a crushing weight, a responsibility that had shaped and hardened him since birth. This was a different kind of poorness, a poverty of the soul. Judith's life, though lacking in material comfort, was incredibly rich in human connection. She knew the names of every child at the orphanage, their fears, and their secret dreams. She was the one they ran to when they were hurt, the one who would share her meager portion without a second thought. This wasn't a calculated act, it was simply who she was. Her kindness was an instinct, a natural response to the world around her, a stark contrast to the transactional relationships that defined the Hopkins family. It was a heart-touching existence. Herbert, on the other hand, navigated a world of lonely opulence. Dinners were silent, tense affairs. Conversations were strategic, laden with subtext about inheritance and influence.
He was surrounded by family but felt utterly alone, a solitary guardian of treasure that brought no joy, only duty. He was protecting a name, a number in a bank account, at the cost of his own humanity. The search for the long-lost heiress was his only escape, a noble purpose in an otherwise hollow existence. A real drama in the making. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Judith's world was about survival, yes, but it was also about shared moment of Gracia's story read aloud, a mended toy, a reassuring hug. Herbert's world was about legacy, about preserving a past and securing a future, with no thought for present. He was so busy protecting the Hopkins dynasty's wealth that he never stopped to ask if it was making any of them happy. The entire situation was ripe for a plot twist. He saw his duty as a sacred vow, a promise made to his dying grandfather. He would find a rightful heir and protect the family from fortune hunters and frauds. This single-minded focus made him blind to anything that didn't fit his narrow worldview. A quiet orphan with a kind heart, insignificant. A potential threat to the estate, a problem to be managed. He was a man with a hammer, and to him, every problem looked like a nail. And so, these two worlds continued to spin on their separate axes, one warm with compassion, the other cold with obligation. One person defined by what she gave, the other by what he protected. Neither Judith Daniels nor Herbert Hopkins could possibly imagine how their orbits were about to catastrophically, beautifully, and irrevocably collide, setting in motion a life-changing story of destiny and true love. The air at the Hopkins family gathering was thick with a scent of old money and fresh tension. These events were never celebrations, they were battlefields where alliances were tested and loyalties were questioned, all under the guise of polite conversation. It was into this viper's nest that Herbert, with a heavy sense of duty, brought up the issue of the girl from the orphanage. Judith Daniels was a loose end, and in his world, loose ends were liabilities. It was time to make her formal dismissal a matter of record. He stood before his family, a collection of cold, expectant faces, and spoke of Judith as if she were a line item on a balance sheet. To them, she was utterly insignificant, a nobody from nowhere, the potential distraction. He called her, his voice devoid of any warmth. His words were carefully chosen to reassure his family that he had the situation under control, that this minor annoyance would be dealt with swiftly and silently. The real prize, the long-lost heiress, was still out there, and that was where the family's focus needed to remain. Judith, unaware of the conversation that sealed her fate, was in another room, asked to wait. She could hear the muffled sound of the gathering, feeling like a ghost haunting a house she didn't belong in. Her presence was seen not as that of a person, but as a problem. To the rich Hopkins clan, an orphan on their property was an anomaly, a potential threat to their carefully curated image. They were a family obsessed with their own story, and Judith had no place in their grand narrative. She was about to be humiliated. Herbert's words hung in the air, cold and final. He was performing his role, being the ruthless protector his family expected him to be. In his mind, he was simply closing a door, preventing a potential complication in his all-consuming search. The irony was almost painful. He was publicly dismissing the very person he was privately desperate to find. The heiress wasn't a distant dream. She was a quiet girl sitting just a few yards away, her secret identity perfectly concealed by his own prejudice. This tense family meeting was a pivotal moment. It solidified Herbert's position within the family, but also set the stage for his eventual downfall and redemption. He was so determined to find the perfect, idealized heir that he couldn't see the real, imperfect human being in front of him. His quest for a fairy tale princess made him blind to the quiet nobility of the so-called pauper. This was a drama of his own making, a truly emotional miscalculation. For him, it was a necessary act, a strategic move to keep the path clear. The family nodded in approval, their faces masks of entitled indifference. They trusted Herbert to handle such trivial matters. The dismissal of Judith Daniels was a mere footnote in their day, a brief interruption before they returned to their discussions of stocks, bonds, and the ever-present mystery of the missing heir. Her fate was sealed with murmur consensus in a room she wasn't even allowed to enter. And so, the decision was made. The door was not just closed, but locked and bolted. Herbert Hopkins had formally cast Judith aside, viewing her as an insignificant pawn in a much larger game. He was completely unaware that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, a mistake that would trigger a shocking chain of events and force him to question everything he thought he knew about duty, honor, and the true meaning of wealth. The search for the heiress had just taken a disastrously wrong turn. The legal inquiry was designed to be intimidating. It was held in the Hopkins Grand Library, a room where the weight of history and power was palpable in the dark wood and leather-bound books. Herbert sat opposite Judith Daniels, a mountain of legal documents separating them like a barricade. His goal was simple: to dismantle her story, expose her as a fraud, and legally remove her from the equation. He began the interrogation with a cold, condescending tone, each question a carefully aimed dart. But something unexpected happened. Under the harsh glare of his scrutiny, Judith didn't crumble. She didn't weep or plead. Instead, she answered his questions with an unwavering honesty that was both disarming and, to Herbert, deeply frustrating. Her kindness was not a mask, it was her very essence. When he tried to twist her words, she would simply restate the truth in her simple, direct way. It was like watching a gentle stream wear away at a stubborn rock. It was a heart-touching display of grace under pressure. He pressed harder, his questions becoming more personal, more invasive. Where were you born? Who were your parents? Do you have any proof of your claims? He was treating her like a criminal, yet her quiet dignity remained intact. At one point, he paused, and in the silence, she simply said, "I don't have much, sir, but I have my word, and it's all I've ever had." That simple statement, spoken without a trace of self-pity, was the first crack in his cynical exterior. This wasn't the reaction of a manipulative schemer. What would you have done in her position? Tell me in the comments. This wasn't going according to plan. Herbert was used to people who were driven by greed, who would lie and cheat to get a piece of the Hopkins fortune. Judith was different. She seemed to want nothing. There was a profound goodness about her that he couldn't reconcile with his view of the world. He was a man who believed everyone had an angle, a hidden motive. Yet, with every honest answer, her simple kindness began to chip away at the armor he had spent a lifetime building around his heart. A strange, unfamiliar feeling was stirring within him. Could this be the beginning of a love story? The interrogation continued for hours. He threw legal jargon at her, cited obscure property laws, and tried to trap her in contradictions. But she remained steadfast, not out of defiance, but out of a simple inability to be anything other than who she was. She was a poor girl, an orphan, who had learned that integrity was the only currency she possessed. And in that moment, in that grand and intimidating room, her integrity was proving to be more valuable than all the Hopkins riches. He found himself looking at her, really looking at her, for the first time, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person. He saw the weariness in her eyes, but also an unshakable strength. His condescension began to falter, replaced by a grudging and deeply unsettling respect. This was not just an inquiry anymore. It was becoming a life-changing moment for him. The drama was shifting from the courtroom to his own soul. As the inquiry concluded, Herbert was left in a state of profound confusion. Nothing had been resolved, yet everything had changed. He had subjected her to a harsh interrogation, expecting to find a fraud, but instead, he had found character. He had intended to break her spirit, but instead, she was beginning to break through his. His cynical world had just been rocked by an unexpected force, the simple, unwavering power of a good person. This was a plot twist he never saw coming. The annual charity gala was a glittering pinnacle of the high society calendar, an event where fortunes were pledged and reputations were made or broken. Herbert, ever the dutiful soldier, was in attendance, navigating the sea of fake smiles and veiled insults. He had, reluctantly, allowed Judith to attend, seeing it as a controlled environment to observe her. It was a test, and he expected her to fail spectacularly, to be overwhelmed by the sheer opulence and cruelty of his world. A poor girl in a palace of predators. And fail she did, at least in their eyes. A particularly cruel, high society rival of the Hopkins family, a woman named Beatrice, cornered Judith near the ballroom entrance. With a voice dripping in venomous sweetness, Beatrice loudly mocked Judith's simple dress and unrefined manners, ensuring a small crowd could hear every word. She humiliated Judith, painting her as a pathetic social climber, a stray dog who had wandered into a royal court. The laughter was quiet, but it was as sharp as broken glass. Herbert watched from a distance, a cold not tightening in his stomach. He should have felt vindicated. This was exactly what he expected. He expected Judith to burst into tears, to run from the room, proving she didn't belong. But she did something else entirely. She absorbed the insult with a quiet grace that was utterly baffling. Then, a moment later, a waiter, rushing and clearly stressed, stumbled nearby, dropping a tray of glasses with a deafening crash. The crowd scoffed at his clumsiness. While Beatrice and her friend sneered, Judith didn't hesitate. She immediately knelt to help the struggling waiter, ignoring the shattered glass and the stares of the onlookers. "It's okay," she whispered to him, her voice a balm of genuine compassion. "Accidents happen. Let's get this cleaned up." In that single unthinking act of kindness, she exposed the breathtaking ugliness of the world around her. It was a heart-touching moment of pure humanity in a room devoid of it. From across the room, that simple act hit Herbert like a physical blow. He saw the genuine compassion on Judith's face and then looked at the shallow, cruel faces of his peers, including his own family. For the first time, he saw his world for what it truly was, a hollow, gilded prison. The immense wealth, the power, the prestigite was all performance. Judith, the orphan he had scorned, was more rich in character than anyone in that ballroom. It was a truly shocking revelation. The incident with the waiter was a small thing, a minor piece of drama in a night of grand gestures. But for Herbert, it was an earthquake. It didn't just make him question his judgment about Judith. It made him question the very foundation of his life. He had spent his entire existence protecting these people, these shallow, cruel parasites. He was defending a world that celebrated viciousness and mocked kindness. This realization was a bitter pill to swallow. He looked back at Judith, who was now smiling gently at the flustered waiter, and felt a profound shift inside him. The cynical exterior he had so carefully maintained was cracking under the weight of this one simple, beautiful act. The gala, the wealth, the rivalries that all seemed so incredibly small. Her genuine compassion didn't just catch his eye, it captured his soul, making him question everything he thought he knew about strength, value, and what was truly worth protecting. This was a life-changing night. Herbert's mind was a battlefield of conflicting thoughts. His logic was at war with a new, unsettling feeling in his gut. He needed to be sure. He needed one final, definitive test to prove his suspicions wrong, to confirm that Judith Daniels was, like everyone else, flawed and driven by self-interest. So, he devised a plan, a simple but elegant trap to test her integrity beyond any doubt. It was a test of character, one that would either confirm his cynicism or shatter it completely. He arranged for Judith to be left alone in the family's private study, a room filled with priceless treasures. Then, using the excuse of a forgotten phone call, he accidentally left a valuable family heirloom on the desk, a small, ornate pocket watch that had belonged to his great-grandfather. It was worth a small fortune, a tempting prize for anyone, especially a poor girl from an orphanage. He watched from a hidden security feed, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. What would she do? Honestly, what would you do? Drop a comment below. Judith was alone in a room for nearly an hour. She wandered, looking at the books and paintings with a quiet curiosity. She noticed the watch, picked it up, and admired its intricate design. Herbert held his breath. This was the moment of truth. She could have so easily slipped it into her pocket. No one would have known. It would have been her word against his. A perfect crime. The ultimate temptation. But she didn't. When Herbert returned, feigning surprise that she was still there, Judith immediately held out the watch. "You left this, Mr. Hopkins," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It's beautiful." But she didn't stop there. She looked at the inscription on the back and then shared a poignant, detailed story about the specific type of engraving, a technique her own father, a humble watchmaker, had taught her about. She spoke of its history with a reverence that stunned him into silence. The story she told wasn't just about the watch, it was about love, memory, and the value of things that can't be bought. It revealed a depth he never, ever expected. She wasn't just an honest orphan, she was a woman with a history, with knowledge, with a soul that resonated with the very heirloom he had used as bait. In trying to expose her greed, he had instead uncovered her profound connection to the world of craftsmanship and legacy, a world he thought only he understood. This plot twist was deeply personal. He took the watch from her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. For the first time, the chill in his veins was replaced by a different kind of shock of warmth that was both terrifying and exhilarating. His test had failed in the most spectacular way possible. She hadn't just returned the valuable object, she had given it back to him with its story, its soul, intact. She had revealed a part of herself that was more valuable than any heirloom. This was a life-changing realization. Herbert was left speechless. He had set a trap for a fox and instead caught a unicorn. Every cynical assumption he had made about her had been systematically dismantled, not by arguments or pleas, but by her quiet, unshakable character. His plan to test Judith's integrity had backfired, revealing not her weakness, but his own profound ignorance. The drama he had manufactured had turned into a deeply emotional and humbling lesson. Suspicion is a funny thing. For Herbert, it had always been a shield, a tool to keep the world at arm's length. But now, his suspicion was turned inward. He was suspicious of his own changing feelings, of his strange, protective instinct that was blooming in his chest whenever he thought of Judith Daniels. This wasn't logical. It wasn't professional. It was dangerous. He couldn't trust his heart, so he decided to trust what he had always trusted: cold, hard facts. He launched a private, clandestine investigation into Judith's past. He hired the best people money could buy, instructed them to dig into every corner of her life, from her mysterious origins to her time at the orphanage. He wanted the truth, no matter how ugly. He was convinced he would find something, some hidden flaw, some past transgression that would justify his initial mistrust and allow him to put his cynical walls back up. He needed to prove that his softening heart was a mistake. But every discovery only deepened the mystery and compounded his confusion. The reports came back with stories of her profound goodness. He read accounts from orphanage staff who called her a little mother, always looking after the younger children. He found records of her giving away what little she had to help others. There was no dirt, no scandal, no secret identity as a con artist. The only secret she held was the secret of her own unwavering decency. What a shocking turn of events. The deeper he dug, the more he felt a growing sense of shame. He was invading the privacy of a genuinely good person, all to satisfy his own internal turmoil. This investigation wasn't about her anymore, it was about him. He was trying to find a monster in her past to justify the monster he sometimes felt himself to be. The search for a flaw was fruitless. Her life, though marked by hardship, was a testament to her resilience and compassion. It was a truly heart-touching story. Then came the most significant discovery. His investigators found an old, retired nurse who had been on duty the night Judith was left at the orphanage. The nurse remembered the baby vividly because of a unique, star-shaped birthmark on her wrist. She also remembered the expensive blanket the baby was wrapped in, a blanket bearing a small, barely noticeable crest. The crest of the Hopkins family. The pieces of the puzzle began to slam into place with breathtaking force. Suddenly, his feelings weren't just emotional anymore, they were logical. The protective instinct he felt for her wasn't a strange anomaly. It was a gut-level recognition of the truth that his mind was too prejudiced to see. She wasn't just a good person, she was a long-lost heiress. The person he was sworn to protect. The realization hit him with the force of a physical impact, leaving him breathless. This was the ultimate plot twist. For the first time, he felt genuinely protective of her, not as a potential asset or a problem, but as Judith. His investigation, meant to push her away, had irrevocably bound him to her. He had started by digging into her past to confirm his suspicions, but instead, he had unearthed her destiny and his own. He now knew the truth, a dangerous, life-changing truth that would set him against the very family he had sworn to defend. The change in Herbert was not sudden, but it was undeniable. It was like watching a glacier melt, a slow but powerful shift in his entire demeanor. The icy condescension in his voice was replaced by a quiet respect. The harshness in his eyes softened whenever Judith was near. His family, ever observant when it came to matters of power and influence, noticed immediately, and they did not approve. Their protector was becoming compromised, and for them, that was unacceptable. The first real test came during another tense family dinner. One of his aunts, a woman with a tongue as sharp as her diamonds, made a snide remark about the orphan, openly questioning why she was still a presence in their lives. The old Herbert would have agreed, or at least stayed silent. But a new man sat at that table. He put down his fork, looked his aunt directly in the eye, and said, "Her name is Judith Daniels, and she is here as my guest." The silence that followed was deafening. It was a shocking act of defiance. For the first time in his life, Herbert had chosen to defend an outsider against his own flesh and blood. It was a public declaration that his loyalties were shifting. He was no longer just a guardian of the Hopkins fortune. He was becoming the champion of a poor girl his family scorned. This wasn't just about being polite. It was a fundamental betrayal in their eyes. The drama at the dinner table was more intense than any boardroom negotiation. His family saw it as a weakness, a foolish infatuation. They couldn't comprehend that his actions were born not of romantic folly, but of a dawning, terrifying truth about her secret identity. He couldn't reveal what he knew about the birthmark, not yet. He needed irrefutable proof. So for now, he had to endure their scorn, their accusations that he was being manipulated. He found himself defending Judith not just from their words, but from their subtle acts of cruelty. It was an isolating, lonely battle. This shift was more than just a change of heart. It was a seismic realignment of his entire world. The fortune he had dedicated his life to protecting now seemed like a gilded cage, and his family, the people he was bound by blood, felt like his jailers. Judith, with her simple decency, represented a freedom he had never known was possible. He was beginning to see that true love wasn't about finding a perfect person, but about finding the courage to protect the good in someone else. His internal loyalties were no longer tied to a bank account or a family name. They were tied to her, to the quiet strength she had shown, to the integrity she possessed. His defense of her was a shocking act to his family, but to him, it felt like the first truly authentic thing he had ever done. He was no longer just Herbert Hopkins, the family lawyer. He was becoming the man Judith Daniels deserved to have on her side. This was the beginning of his redemption. This open defiance was a declaration of war. By defending Judith, he was challenging the very core of his family's values. He was signaling that his allegiance was shifting from their cold, hard fortune to her warm, compassionate heart. The lines had been drawn, and he was standing on the opposite side from everyone he had ever known. A life-changing confrontation was now inevitable. The Hopkins family would not let this go. Just as Herbert was gathering his evidence, solidifying his case for Judith's true identity, his family played their trump card. They were not fools. They had seen the change in him and had started their own scheming. A scheming, ambitious cousin named Marcus, who had always vied for control of the estate, produced what he called the miracle. He stepped forward at a specially convened family meeting, a smug, triumphant look on his face. This was his moment, his power play. He presented a young woman Herbert had never seen before. She was polished, articulate, and carried herself with an air of practiced aristocracy. And on her wrist, she displayed a mark that was a near-perfect replica of the Hopkins birthmark. To accompany this, Marcus produced a forged, but incredibly convincing birth certificate and a fabricated backstory that painted this woman as a long-lost heiress, recently discovered after a tragic, hidden upbringing. It was a masterful piece of theater. The imposter played her part perfectly, weeping on cue as she spoke of her return to her rightful family. The family, desperate for a controllable heir and eager to undermine Herbert's growing independence, embraced her without question. This new woman was everything they wanted the heiress to be: sophisticated, compliant, and most importantly, presented by one of their own. It was a shocking and brilliant maneuver, a perfectly executed piece of corporate-style drama. Suddenly, Judith Daniels was no longer just an insignificant orphan. In the light of this new revelation, she was recast as a manipulative fraud. Marcus and his allies skillfully painted her as a cunning social climber who would try to prey on Herbert's misplaced sympathies. They used Herbert's defense of her as proof of her manipulative powers. In one fell swoop, they had seemingly found the true heir and discredited both Judith and Herbert. It was a cruel, devastating plot twist. Herbert was blindsided. He looked at the imposter's forged documents, at the expertly crafted fake birthmark, and felt the floor drop out from beneath him. He knew in his gut that was a lie, a conspiracy of breathtaking audacity. But the evidence was convincing, at least on the surface. His family was united against him, celebrating their newfound heiress and looking at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was trapped. This move was more than just a family squabble. It was a calculated act of revenge against Herbert for his shifting loyalties. They were reasserting control, reminding him that the family, not his personal feelings, came first. The imposter was a weapon, and she was aimed directly at his heart and at Judith's. The entire situation felt like a nightmare, an emotional trap for which there was no easy escape. All of Herbert's private discoveries, his growing certainty, now looked like foolish naivete. He was isolated, his credibility shattered. He was faced with an impossible choice: to stand with the woman he believed in, with no concrete proof, or to bow to the overwhelming pressure from his family and the seemingly irrefutable evidence they had produced. The scheming relative had not just produced an imposter, he had produced a checkmate, or so it seemed. The pressure on Herbert was immense, a crushing weight from all sides. His family, armed with their convincing imposter, demanded a public declaration. His legal obligations, the very foundation of his career, required him to act on the evidence presented. To defy his family now would be to declare open war, to be cast out and discredited. He was cornered, his heart and his duty locked in a brutal, unwinnable conflict. The drama was reaching its agonizing peak. He met with Judith one last time in the cold, impersonal setting of his office. He couldn't bring himself to look her in the eye. How could he explain that he was about to betray her? That he was about to publicly denounce her claim, even though he believed in his soul that she was a true heiress? His heart screamed for him to fight, to expose a lie, but his mind, trained in logic and risk assessment, saw only ruin. The choice was tearing him apart. The announcement was a formal, sterile press event. Herbert stood at a podium, a hollow man in an expensive suit, his family and their fraudulent heiress standing behind him like vultures. He read from prepared statement, his voice a monotone drone that betrayed none of the emotional turmoil raging inside him. He declared the imposter to be the long-lost heir and, in a few carefully chosen brutal words, dismissed Judith Daniels' claim as unfounded. A public denouncement. A calculated betrayal. What word describes his action right now? Let me know in the comments. For Judith, watching the broadcast from afar, his words were not just a dismissal. They were a death sentence to the fragile hope that had begun to grow in her heart. To be publicly labeled a fraud by the one person who had started to show her kindness was a pain beyond measure. It wasn't a loss of a potential fortune that broke her, it was a loss of faith. He had made her believe, just for a moment, that she might matter. It was the ultimate humiliation, a wound that would surely never heal. Her heart was completely shattered. He sent her away in disgrace. There was no gentle goodbye, just a formal, cold severance. A car was sent to take her back to the orphanage, her few belongings in a small bag. She left the Hopkins estate not with anger, but with profound, bone-deep sorrow. Her brief, improbable dream was over. The poor girl had been put back in her place by the rich man who, for a fleeting moment, she had thought might be her savior. Her love story had turned into a tragedy. Herbert was left alone in the echoing silence of his victory. He had done his duty. He had protected his family. He had preserved the estate. He had won. But as he stood in his grand office, surrounded by the trappings of his success, he had never felt more bankrupt. He had made the logical choice, the safe choice, and in doing so, he had cast away the one person who was truly authentic. This was his hollow victory, and the taste of it was ash in his mouth. The conflict in his soul was far from over. He was a man forced to publicly denounce the very truth he had privately discovered. This act of betrayal, committed under duress, would become the defining moment of his life. It shattered Judith's heart, but it also planted the seeds of his own desperate need for redemption. He had sent her away, but he would soon find that he couldn't escape her memory. He had made a choice that was both legally sound and morally catastrophic. All seemed lost. The gates of the orphanage closed behind Judith Daniels, the sound of final, metallic thud that echoed the closing of a door in her soul. She was back where she started, but she was not the same person. Before, she had possessed a quiet, resilient hope. Now, that hope was gone, replaced by a crushing emptiness. The world had shown her a glimpse of a different life, a different destiny, only to snatch it away with breathtaking cruelty. She moved through her old life like a ghost, the vibrant spirit that had once defined her now extinguished. The children at the orphanage, who had once flocked to her for comfort, now looked at her with worried eyes. She was there, but she was also a million miles away, lost in the memory of being humiliated on a public stage. The media had briefly picked up the story, labeling her the orphan fraud, a title that clung to her like a shroud. This was her falsa derrota, the moment she truly believed the fight was over. Her heart was completely broken. She was convinced, now more than ever, that people like her were never destined for a happy ending. Fairy tales were for other people, for the rich, for the lucky. Her life was meant to be a lesson in insignificance. The brief romance she had imagined, the connection she had felt with Herbert, now seemed like a foolish, childish dream. He had not only rejected her claim, he had rejected her, and that was a wound far deeper than any legal ruling. Meanwhile, Herbert was living in his own private hell. His victory was hollow, a constant, bitter reminder of his own cowardice. The fraudulent heiress and his triumphant family celebrated around him, but their laughter sounded like accusations. He had fulfilled his duty, but he had betrayed his own soul. He was alone, surrounded by the very wealth he had fought to protect, and all he could think about was the quiet orphan he had sent away. He had traded true love for a lie. The mansion felt emptier than ever. Every room held a memory of Judith, her quiet grace in the library, her genuine compassion at the gala, her simple honesty during his cruel interrogation. He had won the battle, but lost the war. He was haunted by the memory of her face, by the trust he had seen in her eyes right before he shattered it. His victory was nothing more than a life sentence in a prison of regret. This was the dark night of his soul, the beginning of his painful journey toward redemption. Judith returned to her small room at the orphanage, convinced that her story was over. She believed that her fate was to be forgotten, another nameless, faceless orphan in a city that didn't care. She had been shown a world of impossible dreams, and then cruelly awakened. The belief that she was destined for nothing was now a core certainty, a sad and final truth she accepted with a broken heart. And so, the two of them were left in their separate prisons of despair. She, broken and convinced that happiness was not for her. He, victorious and convinced he was a monster. All seemed lost, a truly emotional and desperate state of affairs. But sometimes, it's only when everything falls apart that the path to the truth becomes clear. A fatal flaw was waiting to be discovered, a small detail that would unravel the entire conspiracy. Haunted, there is no other word for it. Herbert Hopkins was haunted by the memory of Judith's face. He saw her in his dreams, heard her quiet voice in the silent halls of the mansion. His hollow victory had become a relentless torment. He tried to immerse himself in his work, but the legal documents blurred before his eyes. He tried to engage with his family, but their triumphant chatter was like nails on a chalkboard. He was a man adrift in a sea of regret. He found himself obsessively going over the details of the imposter's story, not confirm it, but to find the lie. He knew it was there, hiding somewhere in the meticulously crafted narrative. He spent his nights in the family archives, poring over old letters and journals, searching for some thing that didn't add up. It was a desperate, almost manic search for the truth he had so publicly denied, a quest for personal redemption. Then he found it, a fatal flaw. It was a small, almost insignificant detail, buried in a letter written by his great-aunt decades ago. The imposter had claimed her fabricated guardian had taken her to live in a small coastal town in the south. But the great-aunt's letter described that very town being completely wiped out by a hurricane 5 years before the imposter claimed to have lived there. It was a ghost town, a place of memory and ruin. It was impossible. The realization struck him with the force of lightning. A single, verifiable lie that unraveled their entire conspiracy. A wave of horror washed over him, so intense it made him physically sick. He had cast away Judith, the one person who was truly authentic, based on a story that was complete fabrication. He had allowed himself to be manipulated, had sacrificed an innocent girl to appease his scheming family. The weight of his guilt was crushing. He now saw the entire conspiracy with horrifying clarity: his cousin's ambition, his family's greed, the imposter performance. It was all a sham, a meticulously planned piece of drama, designed to secure power. And he, Herbert Hopkins, the great protector of the Hopkins legacy, had been their pawn. He had not only failed to protect the true heiress, he had actively participated in her persecution. This shocking truth was his to bear alone. The memory of Judith's face returned, but this time it was not just haunting, it was an accusation. He had called her fraud, had humiliated her in front of the world. He had taken her gentle spirit and broken it. The horror of what he had done was a fire in his veins. He had traded the most precious truth he had ever encountered for a comfortable lie. His life's work, his sense of honor, it all turned to dust in that moment. There was no more conflict, no more doubt, only a singular, burning purpose. He had to fix this. He had to expose the lie and find Judith. The knowledge of his terrible mistake was a life-changing burden, but it was also a catalyst. He had cast away the one person who represented hope and truth, and now he would move heaven and earth to get her back. His desperate, private investigation was about to begin in earnest. With a fatal flaw in the imposter story as his anchor, Herbert launched a desperate, private investigation. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about a frantic search for irrefutable proof. He worked in secret, late into the night, turning the family archives upside down. He knew his family, especially his cousin Marcus, would be watching him. He had to be careful, a spy in his own home, searching for the evidence that would blow their conspiracy wide open. He focused on the time around the long-lost Heiress birth, cross-referencing hospital records, staff rosters, and private family correspondence. He was looking for a needle in a haystack, a single piece of evidence that would corroborate the old nurse's story and, most importantly, connect directly to Judith. The search was painstaking, a maddening journey through faded ink and forgotten memories. The pressure was immense. Every tick of the clock felt like a moment Judith suffered because of his mistake. Days turned into sleepless nights. He grew gaunt, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. His family whispered about his strange behavior, assuming he was buckling under the pressure of his new responsibilities. They had no idea he was systematically building a case against them. This secret quest was his penance, his only path toward a possible redemption. He was fueled by a single image, Judith's honest eyes, a memory that was both his torment and his salvation. And then he found it. Tucked away in a dusty, forgotten storage room was a collection of old, informal family portraits, canvases that hadn't been seen in decades. He unrolled one, and his heart stopped. It was a portrait of his infant cousin, the true heiress, painted just weeks after her birth. And there, on the baby's tiny, chubby wrist, rendered in perfect, unmistakable detail by the artist, was a unique, star-shaped birthmark, the exact same mark he had seen on Judith's wrist. It was the irrefutable proof he had been praying for. Not a story, not a memory, but a perfect visual record, a piece of evidence that could not be denied or forged. He stared at the painting, tears welling in his eyes for the first time in his adult life. It was a moment of profound, emotional clarity. The truth had been there all along, hidden under a layer of dust, waiting for someone with the courage to look for it. This was the ultimate plot twist. Armed with this painting, he finally had the weapon he needed. The portrait was more than just proof of Judith's secret identity. As the heiress, it was proof of his family's treachery. It was a key that would unlock Judith's future and expose his family's lies. His desperate investigation had yielded the one thing that could set things right. It was a life-changing discovery, a moment that would shift the balance of power forever. He carefully rolled up the canvas, his hands trembling. The game had changed. He was no longer the conflicted lawyer torn between duty and heart. He was now an agent of truth, on a mission to right a terrible wrong. The confrontation he was about to initiate would be explosive, a dramatic showdown that would tear his family apart. But it was a price he was now willing to pay for his redemption and for the orphan he had so grievously wronged. The confrontation was set. Herbert didn't choose a quiet office or a private study. He chose the grand ballroom, the very stage where his family had celebrated their fraudulent victory. He called an emergency family meeting under a false pretense, ensuring everyone would be there as scheming cousin Marcus, the imposter, and all the relatives who had so eagerly embraced a lie. They arrived expecting a routine financial update, but they were walking into an ambush. The air was thick with impending drama. Herbert stood alone in the center of the room, the hidden portrait at his side. As his family settled, their faces a mixture of arrogance and impatience, he began to speak. His voice was quiet, but carried an ironclad authority they hadn't heard in weeks. He started by recounting the imposter's story, her tale of a childhood in a southern coastal town. He led her and Marcus nod along, their smug confidence growing with every word. He was setting the trap. Then, with the precision of a master litigator, he sprung it. He produced the historical records, the proof that the town she claimed to live in had been a desolate wasteland during those years. The imposter's face went pale. Marcus jumped to his feet, sputtering denials, but Herbert didn't stop. He exposed every lie, every inconsistency, his words like hammer blows dismantling their entire conspiracy. It was a stunning, methodical takedown, but the final, dramatic flourish was yet to come. "You went to great lengths," Herbert said, his voice ringing with cold fury, "to fake a birthmark." He then turned and unveiled the old family portrait. He pointed to the infant in the painting. "But you couldn't fake this. A portrait of the true heiress, painted from life, showing the exact, unique mark I saw on the wrist of the woman you cast out." The room fell into a shocked, absolute silence. The fraudulent heiress crumbled, bursting into tears and confessing everything, admitting she was a hired actress. Marcus, exposed and defeated, stood frozen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The rest of the family looked on in horror, realizing they had been duped and that Herbert, the man they had scorned, had been right all along. It was a showdown of epic proportions, a moment of pure, unscripted revenge for the injustice done to Judith. This wasn't just about exposing a lie, it was about Herbert reclaiming his own soul. He confronted them not just as a lawyer, but as a man who had been pushed to the brink and had found his moral compass. He was no longer their pawn. The confrontation was his declaration of independence, a life-changing moment where he finally chose truth over legacy and justice over blood. This was his act of redemption, played out on the grandest stage possible. He left them standing amidst the ruins of their own deceit. He didn't wait for their apologies or excuses. His mission wasn't over. Exposing conspiracy was only the first step. The second, and most important, was finding Judith. He walked out of the ballroom without a backward glance, leaving his family to grapple with the consequences of their actions. The dramatic showdown was over, but the love story was just beginning its most critical chapter. The fraudulent heiress was scheduled to be officially presented to the world at a massive press conference. The event was already underway, with flashbulbs popping and reporters eagerly awaiting the arrival of the miracle Hopkins heir. Marcus and the family, desperate to control the narrative after the disastrous showdown, decided to proceed, hoping to discredit Herbert before he could act. They underestimated him. They had no idea he was about to turn their grand celebration into a public execution of their lies. Just as the imposter was about to take the stage, Herbert crashed the press conference. He didn't sneak in, he walked straight through the main doors, his face set with a grim determination that stunned everyone into silence. He carried the rolled-up portrait like a weapon. The reporters, sensing a far more compelling story, immediately turned their cameras on him. This was the kind of shocking drama they lived for. He took the stage uninvited and addressed the bewildered crowd. "You've been brought here today under false pretenses," he began, his voice booming through the auditorium. "You were promised a story of a long-lost heiress. I am here to give you that story, the true story." He then systematically laid out the entire conspiracy, presenting the evidence of the fraud with irrefutable clarity. The room was captivated, hanging on his every word. The pinnacle of his presentation was, once again, the portrait. He unveiled it for the cameras, placing it on an easel next to a high-resolution photo of Judith's wrist, showing the identical, unique birthmark. "The proof has been here all along," he declared. "Ladies and gentlemen, the sole rightful heir to the entire Hopkins fortune is not the woman hiding backstage. It is a woman of incredible strength and integrity. Her name is Judith Daniels." Like this video as a sign of respect for his courage, the revelation sent a shockwave through the press. It was a bombshell, a plot twist of epic proportions that would dominate the news cycle for weeks. Herbert had not just cleared Judith's name, he had publicly championed her, using the very platform meant to celebrate her rival to announce her rightful place. He had turned his family's weapon back on them, ensuring the whole world would know the truth. His public denouncement was now replaced by a public coronation. His family could only watch from the wings, utterly defeated, as their carefully constructed world came crashing down around them. Herbert had seized control of the narrative in the most dramatic way imaginable. He wasn't just a lawyer anymore, he was a force of nature, a man on a mission to correct a great injustice. This public act was a final, critical step in his path to redemption, proving his loyalty was now and forever with Judith. He ended his speech with a simple, powerful statement: "The search for the heiress is over." He then walked off the stage, leaving the stunned press in a frenzy. He didn't stay to answer questions or bask in the victory. His work there was done. He had presented the irrefutable proof, and now there was only one thing left to do: find the woman at the center of it all and beg for her forgiveness. His destiny and his true love awaited. Herbert didn't send a car or a messenger. He went himself. He drove to the orphanage, the place where Judith's story began and where her heart had been broken. He walked through the same gates she had passed through in disgrace, his own heart pounding with a nervous rhythm he hadn't felt since he was a boy. He found her in the small, quiet garden, reading to a group of children. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, confusion, and a pain he had put there. The children scattered, sensing the weight of the moment. He and Judith were left alone among the roses. He didn't offer excuses or try to explain. He simply walked toward her, his face a canvas of regret and profound sorrow, and got down on one knee in the soft dirt. He, Herbert Hopkins, the proud, rich scion of a powerful dynasty, knelt before the humble orphan he had so terribly wronged. It was an act of complete and total surrender. "Judith," he began, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I have no right to ask this. I failed you. I betrayed you. I broke your heart to save myself, and it was the most contemptible act of my life." Tears streamed freely down his face. "Forgiveness is more than I deserve, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it, if you'll let me." This was the most heart-touching confession, a plea for redemption from the deepest part of his soul. He told her everything about the conspiracy, the investigation, the portrait. He then looked up at her and said, "I spent years searching for the long-lost heiress, believing it was my duty. I was wrong. My true destiny was never about finding an heir to a fortune. It was about finding you." The raw honesty of his words hung in the air, a fragile bridge between their two worlds. The ultimate poor girl, rich man romance was reaching its climax. He reached into his pocket and pulled out not a legal document, but a small velvet box. Inside was a simple ring. "The Hopkins fortune is yours, Judith. It is your birthright. But that's not what I am here to offer you. I am here to offer you my heart, my life, my devotion. I love you." He paused, his gaze locked on hers. "Will you marry me, Judith Daniels? Will you let me prove that true love is the greatest inheritance of all?" It was a life-changing moment, a proposal born not from convenience or duty, but from a crucible of betrayal, regret, and ultimate redemption. Judith looked down at the man kneeling before her, the man who had been her tormentor and was now her supplicant. She saw not the cold lawyer, but a broken man who had torn down his entire world to find his way back to her. She saw the truth of his words in his tear-filled eyes. She reached out her hand, not to take the ring, but to gently touch his face. A single tear rolled down her cheek, a mirror of his own. In that quiet, forgiving touch, the entire emotional journey found its resolution. The orphan and the heiress, the poor girl and the rich man, had finally found their way through the drama and the pain. Their love story, forged in fire and tempered by truth, was about to truly begin. In the end, this story teaches us a powerful lesson. True value isn't locked away in a vault, it's found in a person's character. The greatest inheritance wasn't the money or the estate, it was a redemption found in a second chance, and a true love that proved to be stronger than any lie. It's a reminder that our real identity is defined by our kindness, not our circumstances. If you also believe that a person's integrity is their greatest asset, and that compassion is a superpower, then you've found your place. This channel is more than just stories, it's a community for people who believe in the power of the human heart. Subscribe now and join our family of viewers who champion these values. Like this video as a sign of respect for Judith's resilience and Herbert's incredible transformation. Let's spread this powerful message. Comment below with the answer to this question. What was the one word you felt when Herbert got down on his knee? Share this story with one person who needs to be reminded that your past does not define your destiny. And don't let the journey end here. While you wait for our next upload, know that our channel is a treasure chest of emotional, heart-touching stories just like this one. Explore our videos and discover other unforgettable journeys that will restore your faith in humanity. Finally, to ensure you don't miss any of the incredible sagas we have coming your way, make sure you activate that notification bell. We have so many more powerful stories to share, and you won't want to be left out of the next emotional roller coaster.